Bits, Bytes, and Banter. You might have known it as a podcast, but the lack of spontaneity of a podcast and the post-production editing and stuff just ground out my brain. So we're going live now with the new series. And I'm so glad to have you on it because I think you'd agree that in the past when we've worked together, we probably work best live because we just don't know what's going to come out next. And that's the fun of this. I'd like to introduce you as a change maker, as someone who's taught me a lot over the last couple of years. And the first thing is I would suggest that to listeners, don't allow Michael's American accent fool you into thinking that he isn't embedded in Europe. You've been here a while.
Gary, I'm 56. I've spent 40 something years of my life. The math's too big. You can't count that high. You and I were talking about it earlier. I can't count. I love Europe. I'm a Europhile. Been here since I was a young kid, and I really love it. So, yep, I can't lose the American accent. It's my wife's fault. If I say biscuit, she goes, no, it's cookie. But other than that, man, love being here.
I take it then that you're not a great singer.
Oh, say, can you see?
No, because there's an old saying that, you get the Irish or the English guy goes to America for a long weekend and they come back with a Bostonian accent. Apparently, it's if you've got a musical ear. So we'll leave the music to Donna Roach and his gang. So tell us a bit, if you can, about in those 40 odd years, and I can't believe you're not in the industry 40 years. You've seen a lot of change, man. You've seen it go from punch cards to floppy disks to this thing called
punch cards. Really? Come on.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe not punch cards. No, I mean, honestly, our first job is we bought a factory in Ireland, in Cork, and we were literally flying suitcases of computer chips from Japan and Korea into Ireland and sticking them on memory boards, which people were buying, worth more than its weight in gold. And we could then put "Made in Europe" on it and sell them.
Were they DRAM?
Yeah, DRAM. It was DRAM. Yeah, and my American Express. I had a gold American Express card. I was probably pumping $50,000 a week through that thing. Wow. It was a great business. That was my start into the industry. Legal? I think so, but maybe not. But it was good.
Retrospectively, I didn't see when we were doing a quick check. I didn't see your criminal record on LinkedIn, but
I hope not.
Yeah. Okay.
So I've only been arrested a few times, so don't worry about it.
Isn't that the fun thing about the data center industry? That really all hardware, whether it's floppy punch card or today, it's just about the data. It's about the growth of data. And you would be led to believe that data has just been invented yesterday based on a lot of stuff. Tell us about sort of the change in you and the change that data has had in your organization a bit and the planet.
Going back to the Irish and their ability to wax lyrical, it was you at Kickstart 2019. You and me were sitting together. We were talking about the future of the data center industry, and I think we're pretty prescient. But you're the one that said, "Let's stop talking about the size of your center. Let's start talking about the value of your data in your data center." And I think that issue has proved so prescient. So thanks for putting that thought in my head.
I probably robbed it off the internet. You know yourself.
Wherever you got it from. But the beauty of it is that this is all about the data. The buildings are just buildings. They're very powerful buildings. They're very solid buildings. They're usually gray and nondescript. They're not very architecturally significant. But it truly is what's going on inside. The collection of, the movement of, the trading of, the aggregation of, the studying of, and the storing of data. And that's been the value since the punch card. It's just gotten so much bigger.
And data is a little bit like the alphabet. It only matters when you weave it together into words. Does it make an awful lot of sense for most people? And obviously you can get so many combinations of permutations and you've got so many different dialects and languages and stuff. But what is that data when you break it down, Michael? You know from your clients that only a small or moderate subset are the social media guys. Who are the other clients that are basically growing, maintaining their businesses? What other sectors? Because I think it's sometimes
Yeah,
lost
yeah. I
that.
think we see the social media because, of course, we're human, and that's the applications that are built for us. Um, I still go back in amazement and looking at how I can go onto my airline app and I can literally punch into their mainframe computer using my app. So my app shows me seat configuration or upgrade or meal choice. And when I'm punching on that, that's actually being translated through a series of different networks, through a series of data centers into a mainframe computer that was built in the 1960s. Um, and still runs today. And that's amazing that we've built this technology that allows the human to interface the systems. But I would say 90+% of these systems now are machine to machine. It's a sensor connecting a database worth of information so I can validate whether my building or my factory or my car is running. All this data is now connected. When you have an oil light pop on your dashboard, you know that the factory already got a message a week ago about it. So it's that level of data is where I see the big growth.
And what about society? I mean, the invisible stuff, the smart city. It's a big, large title. But again, when you look at why we want smart cities, it's usually to make quality of life, quality of air, quality of transport, all that type of stuff better. The smart is only smart because of data, right?
No, 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 no. The data is an electron. Data is a drop of oil. Data is a glass of water. It's nothing until it is used. Um, and so you have to constantly value data, and at some point data becomes worth less than the media that it's stored on, and then the right thing to do is to have a destruction policy, because otherwise you're storing data that has no real value. I don't think we've come close there yet, but I think the world is starting to get angry, and as citizens, and we see data centers being built up, and we see the size of technology, we're starting to get scared of, like, have we let data take control, or are we humans in control? So I think that fight is kicking up, but the fight is relatively simplistic because, no disrespect, but I think journalists don't always understand how to take a nuanced argument and describe it. So they go for shock talk, and unfortunately we're getting pointed at, um, totally incorrectly, but nonetheless we're getting it. So we have to deal with it.
But there's a saying that the only thing we've learned from reading history is that we've never learned anything from reading history.
Is that is
And
that the cynical side of history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes? Is that what you're saying?
you,
We
you
always do the same thing over and over and over again, but we never learn. Yeah, probably.
yeah,
Yeah,
a lot of the time, because
yeah.
there's a saying again that every generation thinks they've invented music. It's just human
Yeah.
behavior. It's human behavior, right? Yeah, although there's only 12 notes. So when we look at, I won't call it the battleground, but the change associated with data and the supporting centers, like all industries, whether it's hotels, whether it's finance, whether it's road traffic systems, um, eventually when there's critical mass, when and it feels we're at that now, it has to be regulated, rightly so, to build a trust based. Where are we with that? Both the regulation, in your opinion, the trust, and the next steps.
Oh yeah, you were talking about change. My entire career has been commercial, marketing, sales, business development, always in the selling side of it. Generally speaking, it's because I never actually got an electrical engineering degree, so I couldn't actually do anything. I just can only sell it, which is fine. I love being a salesperson. Um, but recently regulation has taken over, and I think we got to recognize this is the year, well, I guess last year is the year when data centers are now being fundamentally called out in national and European level regulation. And so get ready. There's at least 10 different laws that I know of right now that are being written that will regulate us and how we operate. So let's not fight it. Let's get with it and understand how to make it effective, because it will deliver trust. And I think that's the big issue we're missing is unregulated. This industry is growing willy-nilly. Unregulated people have done some things that are perhaps a bit suspect. So regulation is going to help bring trust to our industry, and I think that's going to be actually really good for us.
So, again, two words in data center, very different words, data and center.
Yeah.
When you talk about 10 regulation papers coming this year alone, you refer to the centers, the operational entity called the centers. Correct?
No, both actually. So the problem that people often knock the European Commission, the folks in Brussels. I actually interact with them on a regular basis, and I find them to be radically intelligent. So of the regulations that are coming in, probably 80% of it touches on the actual infrastructure. Is the infrastructure efficient? Is it sustainable? Is it in the right place, et cetera?
Yeah.
But they are starting to get into the conversation that we started with, which is the data that's being processed of a societal value that justifies these centers? Because the centers consume physical resources. So that argument is actually already starting as well. Does it have an end? I don't know. I've listened to some of these. They go around in circles because it's so hard. Who's to tell you that joy generated from watching a cat video doesn't have value, whereas monitoring a hospital does? I don't know. Some people are depressed and they want a happy video. So I don't know. How do you value data?
Okay, and one of the areas that we often speak about is regulation based on both the data and the centers. Now, obviously, the data privacy, data protection, data security seem to have, when you consider GDPR, which was brought in, can you believe it, 5 years ago, 2018 now, 2019, was 9 years in the making to get to GDPR, which was 27, 28 before Brexit, states to come to a framework. Wasn't even, it was a framework, not the end product, because it was subject to interpretation. So I think that gives us a sense that these things evolve, these things, because societal shifts around Europe are changing as well. We're talking about in Europe in particular, what, 27 states that have to implement and agree. Fair play to you, Michael. That's what I say. Fair play to you for, as a commercial animal, which you said earlier you were. You spent a lot of time in Brussels, man.
Yeah. And let's take that for a second. Because part of the thing about your GDPR is it took a long time because nobody really cared about it until they finally understood what GDPR was. And I won't go into a diatribe, but if you think of America treats the data collector as the owner of the data, and if you think of sort of the Chinese market as, I'm just talking the big markets, the Chinese market is the state owns the data ultimately, or at least controls it. In Europe, the whole point behind GDPR is like, no, the citizen owns the citizen's data. End of story. It's a fundamental human right. So that took a long time for people to grasp GDPR and then go, oh yeah, actually this makes sense. Someone was smart. The problem we've got now is we've got a red light flashing saying if we do not become a sustainable economy by 2050, the world will end. Okay, maybe it's not that bad, but it's bad. Therefore,
that's the commercial PR marketing person coming out there. But it was impressive.
Okay, but but this is the point: someone has successfully inside of Europe created this concept that if we are not green by 2050, bad things, really, really bad things will happen, and that's created a pressure on people and businesses who are willing to accept the imposition of some of these issues and rules, and the regulators to get to work and start writing these laws. And so I find that there is a ticking clock that's been set in place in Europe. And with all due respect to America, fundamentally they're 4 or 5 years behind. Now they got a lot of money to throw at things, and they're going to start using protectionism. But the reality is Europe is fundamentally ahead in this game, which is good. Europe can make a name for itself here.
It is good, and even when we go back to the GDPR, but for listeners, that's more to do with the data, obviously. Fundamentally, when you break it all down, there's two things that I took away from that year was that it allowed for new things that were being created around data to embed security by design, privacy by design. So it's very much the framework for the new stuff going ahead. But then we always have to have mindfulness, to your point, of the legacy stuff. And when you say that Galileo and the airline reservation systems are still running on the mainframe, probably COBOL or
Yeah.
RPG or whatever, we need to give ourselves the time to acknowledge that we can't just turn off the old and turn on the new. Same as hybrid cars are moving us away from moving us in the transition from combustion engines. Sometimes, Michael, I think because we can't touch data, because we can't feel it, because it's hard to articulate that actually it has all the same human or legacy traits of transition. And that's to me then leads me nicely into things like the climate neutral data center pact, which you, in fairness to you, you championed, but you brought an awful lot of all the stakeholders, so not just one cohort, all the stakeholders, from the big guys to the small guys to the regional guys to the American guys together. What have you learned from that professionally, and obviously where are you at, and how are you sort of helping, let's say, give some terms of reference for policymakers in Europe as they
Yeah.
look at the
So
Green Deal?
though my life has changed, I've had, people say, well, you just spent your whole career at Equinix. What are you talking about? Your life has changed. I've had 13 different jobs inside of Equinix over 23 years now. And they have been vast and varied. And this last one, which is pretty much full on policy work, um, is very different. But I think that the key issue with the pact, I've realized yin and yang. There's the core of what was behind the pact that everybody has to buy into and becomes solid and permanent. And then there's all the stuff around it that actually, when you really look at it, can change at any point in time, and you should constantly evolve. And so the thing about the pact that's most important is, as far as I can tell, we're the only group, not just in Europe, but worldwide, that's not telling people how to run a data center or how to manage data. We're actually setting targets. What do you need to achieve to be climate neutral? And that those targets will change, but that's our purpose, and that purpose will not go away. And everybody who's signing on, and we're adding, just amazed with the number of people that are signing on, even though we do no marketing. Um, we're looking at major software companies like SAP. We're looking at telecommunication companies like T-Systems, Orange Business Services, systems integrators, IBM, Intel, not just cloud and colo. They're signing on because fundamentally they believe we have to define what is climate neutral before we as businesses can decide what to do and how to do it. But everything else around it changes, including the fact that we wrote a self-regulatory initiative, published it a year before the first laws started getting written. So we're now going from self-regulated industry to regulated industry, but the core value doesn't change. And I think that's the thing, is whatever you do in life, remember your core, stick to your core, keep it simple, and everything else changes because.
That's for the other show where we're going to get life messages from Michale Winterson. That's the one where we get people to get a nice glass of their favorite wine. But
Yeah.
you could do that show as well. But so you use a word law, okay? A lot of people read a lot about sort of things like Green Deal, the Green Deal taxonomy, all of the, which is basically, my understanding, is the framework for Europe to be carbon neutral by 2050 or whatever. So I take it you're not running all of this wonderful initiative in isolation of the people who are actually going to be the lawmakers. So
No.
So you started this, must be 3 years ago. I know it's officially launched 2 years, but there was a lot of work done before it.
Yeah.
Are you starting to see part, if not all, of your suggestions being integrated into the Green Deal and others that will be filtered out into the geographies?
Yeah. So the thing we did that's probably the most is we immediately reached out to every known trade association we could find that was either data center oriented or just technology oriented, broader ones like Tech UK or Eco or groups like that. And started asking them, okay, you see this Green Deal and you see that they're challenging the IT industry to be climate neutral by 2030. What's your point of view? And then you start realizing either one, they hadn't thought about it, ding, light bulb, or two, they had started thinking about it. And that's when we said, well, why don't we all get together and we all try to agree, is there a fundamental definition? That has led to a set of coordination between all of us that is open, even though during normal operating hours we're generally competitive. During this particular issue, we are, I would say, very, very open, very honest, and very much focused on let's do the right thing, and that's just so important. That's created the momentum that I think we've got behind this climate neutral data center pact.
Yeah, and the fact now you've got sort of the different cohorts, because data doesn't just rest in the center; it has to get there.
Yes.
It has to be used. We spoke earlier, maybe on or off air, about genuinely for listeners, notwithstanding the fact that there is a lot of data in the world, some say, 50 to 60 zettabytes. That's less than 10% of the data that's anticipated to be in the world by 2030. When you
I'd
stop,
agree, maybe even more, but yes.
maybe even more. But we do
Yeah.
then go back to human behavior, because who in this call or who will watch this later has a house that isn't probably full of a lot of stuff they should be thrown out. Open presses, they're full of stuff. Human behavior, I think at its core is to hoard. I don't know why. Every one of us has a press that has the old connectors and cables and stuff for every device we've ever had since we were 15.
Yep.
On the basis that human behavior tends to repeat the past, as we said earlier, will there be regulation, in your opinion, that not used data over certain periods will be automatically deleted? Or dark
So
data?
now you're going to get into the weird, boring geek bit of Michael
Yeah,
Winterson. I'm an economist. I'm an economist.
I know, but dark data or glacial
Yeah.
data, as it's called, is valuable in the fact that that's what a lot of the algorithms and AI and stuff depend on.
Yeah.
To be accurate.
So I actually think in the case of data, the market will sort it out. We continue to innovate better and better and more efficient and more efficient ways to collect and move and store data. The Moore's law doesn't just apply to the processor; it also applies to storage, to networks, etc. So as long as we keep innovating technology faster than the growth of data, it is the opportunity cost of destroying data is actually less than zero, because it takes effort and time to worry about it as opposed to just letting it collect. This will end someday, and then all of a sudden the price of storing this useless dark data will weigh on someone. It'll be, do I really want to have 20 terabytes of contract with Apple or whoever's providing me iCloud data? At some point I go, I don't have the money for that. I'm going to downgrade to 10 and I'm going to flush out the shit data. Was I allowed to say shit? Is shit okay?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
no. I'm just glad. So I'm so glad that a guest has been the first to do an expletive. It's usually me, so that's
okay. All right, fine. So I think businesses as well are going to get into it. And so actually, if you think about the concept of edge that everybody's been talking about, you got the core and hyperscale cloud data centers and co-location sites in cities, and then you got edge. The reality is, what is edge doing? Well, edge has two roles. Edge is an aggregation point, cell towers, fiber networks, local devices. But edge has another point. It's a preprocessor. It's going to clear out a lot of the data and actually just reject a lot of the data before it even gets sent to the core. So I think edge, in a certain sense, is one of the ways that you create a commercial barrier to storing data.
Isn't that interesting? Because listening to a lot of the telcos around Europe and etc., there's a bit of a bun fight going on as who should pay for all that over the top stuff. on the networks, on backhaul networks and stuff. So when it becomes economic, there will be filters. There will be filters at the edge to filter out if you're being charged on the backhaul and stuff. But that's getting a bit technical. What was interesting last week in Davos was a lot of stuff being discussed, and the two things that came out very clearly was the two of the maybe 5 mega trends in the world right now is decarbonization of everything we do, whether we bite it, whether we burn it, whether we buy it. We got to just look at all of those aspects. And the other was we can't achieve the former without digitalization, digital transformation, digital. You would be amazed, and maybe you can comment on this, the amount of people who don't connect digital transformation, digitalization with the data that sits in a center.
Yeah, that's perhaps where I think we as an industry, and you've called this out in the past, we as an industry have failed miserably to take a responsibility to stop promulgating this stupid story about size. It's a man thing, size. I literally was on a call this morning with someone who's claiming they've raised all this money and they're gonna deploy a gigawatt of capacity around the world in the next 5 years. I'm sitting there going, to do what? Like what? And I said, well, what's the purpose? The data. What are you going to do? Why do you want to do this? And they're saying, oh, I want to deploy a gigawatt of capacity. So I think we've got to fundamentally start turning around saying, to do what? What are we helping? So I find a great website, IEA.org, International Energy Association, our agency. It's a nonprofit. Great people. They've got this whole game down pat. They are looking at how digitization or digitalization, depending on who chooses the word, can lead to fundamental energy savings across residential or office space, transportation and manufacturing and agriculture. By the way, these people are responsible for 90+% of all carbon emissions in the planet, not data centers.
Got it.
So when people start yelling at a data center at 2% of emissions and less and shrinking, I'm sitting here going, but wait, 90+% is all over here. And we help through digitization, cars to run better, planes to run better, houses to run better. This is the problem. We're not telling that story.
You've got it. There's a weighing scales that I use often, and it is on one side you have the 2%, 1.9%, which is the weighing scales of the carbon for the centers, and on the right then you've got the delta where it's reducing in society. All of the delta between one and the other is massive. Of the amount of the data and the center. George Kamaya is the guy you're referring to. He drives that team in IEA, and I'm so glad you referenced it, because one of the things we've been doing for a while is we need to find a common term of reference, because it ranges from, depending on whether you're selling a location to the world uses 20% of all electricity, sometimes confused with energy, which isn't the same thing. So I love the fact that we've arrived at the end of the show by saying one of the most important things, we need to be consistent with our messaging. Because if we aren't consistent with our messaging, then we have no chance in influencing those who need to be influenced, policymakers, and those that need to be corrected, a lot of media. So I'm going to give you the last word, Michale Winterson, The American Werewolf in London. Great movie, love it.
Yeah, it's a good movie.
What in 30 seconds would you love us to be talking about in 3 years on this show when you come back?
I want to know what the future energy systems are that we're going to be tapping into. Is it hydrogen? Is it large scale battery storage? And it can be lithium. Is it renewables? Is it nuclear? Something's got to change at the energy level for us to truly make the change to 100% renewable. We're getting there, but that's the difference.
I don't think you're referring just to facilitating the prosumer model of data centers where you take and you give and all that. You're talking about society.
Yeah, society, totally. And by the way, data centers can be engineered to be part of that. We could provide support back up into these smart grids.
We're seeing it in Dublin now, thank goodness, where UPSs are now being used as BESS. And I think one of the wonderful things is that legacy of data centers is only if 15 years old.
Yeah. And it would be, well, no, we've already talked about this. For you youngins, it's 15 years old. But for me, I can go back 30 years. So that's my last word.
Okay, Michael Winterson, if you want to say you're older than me, I'm good with that. I think we were born the same year. But with that, Michael, it's always a pleasure. We could talk for hours, but nobody will be listening. You're doing some good stuff, man. You really are.
Thank you, sir.
You really are. The fact that you brought that big gang together and kept them together, you know, bringing people together is a start, but actually getting executable action is the magic. Keep doing what you're doing. It'll run off and it'll pay off in the long run. And always remember, when people start telling you back what you told them years before, you're actually winning, not losing. I've only learned that recently. So thank you, Michael Winterson.
Thank you, Gary. Speak soon.